We want to move on. We've got a great group here, so we want to get right to it. Ryan Newberry. Ryan Newberry is a copywriter for a local marketing agency and says he can quote Monty Python and the Holy Grail word for word. He also, man, chicks dig that, and buys Mad Libs at toy stores even though he has no children. After 27 years, a college degree, and 10 months of backpacking through Europe, the world still doesn't make much sense to him, so he says he's decided to just laugh and pretend that he is at least in on the joke. Again, chicks dig all that. Please welcome Ryan Newberry.
Hello, ladies. How many surrealists does it take to screw in a light bulb? Fish! Surreal art touches us here sometimes. For example, I Am the Walrus. It touches us here sometimes. For example, Salvador Dali's paintings. And sometimes it touches here in the rib area and here on the bottom of our feet, and we say, surrealism, stop tickling me. It's a phenomenon known as laughter, and I intend to explore that tonight. At the risk of upstaging the artist presenting tonight, as well as any artist anywhere, I'd like to introduce you all to Clash. Now, I'm not saying I'm a prodigy or anything, but my friend Davey and I do this when we were just 7. We didn't know it at the time, but we were playing a game called Exquisite Corpse, which was popularized by surreal artists in the 1910s. An example of the written version of this game is the eccentric writers abruptly galloped to the karaoke bar. Exquisite Corpse is played in groups, with each player picking up where the last left off, either with a drawing or a written story. The twist is that you don't get to see what the people before you did. At the end, you get a nice surprise, like this, a Mad Lib. Exquisite Corpse is actually a predecessor of Mad Libs, one of my other favorite childhood pastimes. Alright, I'm not going to lie to a room full of complete strangers. I still play Mad Libs, and there's actually a book of them sitting on my bedside table right now. I'm Ryan, I'm 27, and I giggle my head off at really silly things. Now, you may be thinking this all seems pretty absurd, but you're wrong. Absurdism is actually about the futility of life, hopeless situations, fundamental failures to communicate. Surrealism, on the other hand, is not about a lack of meaning, but about exploring new meanings and the possibilities that we never dreamed existed. Speaking of dreams, surrealism has its roots in many places, but one of the most famous influences on early surrealists was none other than Sigmund Freud, whose work with free association, dream analysis, and unconscious mind was crucial to developing the surrealist methods for liberating the imagination and dreaming up landscapes like this one, painted by Salvador Dali. It's called The Persistence of Memory, and its artist, Mr. Dali, just so happens to be the face of surrealism. Get it? Dali embraced the bizarre in both his art and his lifestyle, leading many people to question his sanity. However, he maintained that painting crazy pictures and acting like a crazy person do not make a person crazy. There is only one difference between a madman and me, he once said, and that is that I'm not mad. Now, if that sounds like something you might hear at a certain tea party, that's because Alice in Wonderland is actually one of the earliest examples of surreal comedy, even if author Lewis Carroll wasn't aware of it at the time. And when I say he wasn't aware, it's because the surrealist movement didn't start for another 50 years, not because he was high on opium. Maybe not coincidentally, a lot of surreal humor is dismissed as stoner comedy. Not necessarily Mad Libs, because that's a kid's game, and not necessarily Alice in Wonderland either, even though it actually is a stoner comedy. Everyone remembers this classic scene in which the caterpillar tells Alice that watching The Wizard of Oz while listening to Dark Side of the Moon will blow your freaking mind, man. As surrealism caught on in the 1910s and 20s, it became a social movement, complete with newsletters like this one. The movement's goal was to liberate people from the cultural, societal, and political structures imposed on us from birth, to liberate us from the so-called false rationality and encourage us to live life according to our own unique personal rationales. For example, some artists prefer to live in a world where a urinal is considered art. This famous Duchamp piece is technically a work of Dada, a cousin of surrealism, but it's also very much an example of a surreal joke. I mean, just the fact that this thing is in a museum is pretty hilarious. And from such humble beginnings as an autographed urinal, surreal humor has evolved and thrived, continuing today in the form of such hilarious television programming as Aqua Teen Hunger Force. which airs late nights on Cartoon Network, and in keeping with surrealist tradition, has absolutely nothing to do with aqua, teens, hunger, or forces. Speaking of titles that are perfectly wrong, you might recall this recurring Saturday Night Live sketch, with surreal humor boiled down to one profound observation at a time, like this one. A good way to threaten somebody is to light a stick of dynamite. Then you call the guy and hold the burning fuse up to the phone. Hear that, you say? That's dynamite, baby. And that's the beauty of it. Most schools of humor subvert expectations, but surreal comedy rejects expectations altogether. Non sequiturs, incongruous logic, images, and ideas. The surprise is what makes it great. Something the brilliant Brits of Monty Python excelled at, as you can see here. Great surreal comedy is impossible to predict, and that's what makes it so unforgettable. And now for something completely different. The sea cucumber communicates by sending hormone signals through the water. It can be found in great numbers on the deep sea floor, where it often makes up the majority of the biomass. Perhaps the easiest way to distinguish between subclasses of sea cucumbers is by looking at their oral tentacles, which is obvious to see here. Meanwhile, just outside of Camelot, Monty Python teaches us that surreal humor isn't just for the unwashed and stoned masses. These guys met while attending Oxford and Cambridge, so there must be a little more thought behind surreal comedy than just, let's do something like those melting clocks, only funnier. In fact, there's a lot more to it, as a Swiss study on the brain's responses to different kinds of humor revealed. Cartoons like these, apparently from the Switzerland edition of The New Yorker, were shown to subjects in the study. The cartoon on the left is an example of an intuitive joke, while the one on the right contains a surreal gag. MRIs show the subjects' brains process the jokes in different ways, and the abstract jokes actually required less brain power to process, as you can see in Figure A. However, the scientists behind the study concluded that people who prefer surreal comedy are more likely to seek out exciting life experiences through art, music, travel, and unconventional living. And we're totally not geeks, the scientist added. But if you know what this image is, you're definitely a geek. In the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, surreal humor is actually used as rocket fuel. A spaceship is powered by an engine called the improbability drive, and when it's in use, anything can happen. Hence the sperm whale and the petunias plummeting to their untimely demise. It's a random and unfeeling universe. But you don't need Daffy Duck to tell you that. Surreal humor, though, isn't a response to the entropy and randomness of the universe, but rather a response to the order we as a society have imposed on our lives. Case in point, the term surrealism itself was coined by a playwright who helped his friend steal the Mona Lisa from the Louvre and then told the cops that Pablo Picasso did it. Which reminds me, how many surrealists does it take to screw in a light bulb? 3, of course. 2 to hold the giraffe and 1 to put the candles in the bathtub. I'll leave you with an inspirational quote from our favorite surrealist philosopher. Ambition is like a frog sitting on a Venus flytrap. The flytrap can bite and bite, but it won't bother the frog. Then some other stuff could happen, and it could be like ambition. Good night, and thanks.